lots of people have it later and you can see them.
That's true. We could probably do that. We watch Red Zone, so we get to see it along with everything else at the same time.
Okay, well,
I don't
sorry,
know.
thank you.
No worries. Enjoy. Okay, we don't need covenant and connection today. We're going with Talmud. There's nobody online, but we are streaming on the internet. So for anyone who needs to know that, please know we are streaming on the internet. Okay, we are on Zoom, but also we are studying Talmud. So we're still on Brachot 10a, and we'll go back just a little bit. So we were talking about Isaiah and Hezekiah. And Isaiah had talked about the issues that Hezekiah would have children. Hezekiah was a virtuous king. He was a good king. The rabbis agree, and everybody, the prophets agree, and he was a pretty good king. But that his children wouldn't be virtuous. And so he hadn't had any. But that's a problem because he hadn't had any intentionally. You don't have to have children. If you're incapable of having children or it just doesn't work out, God isn't going to say, well, you didn't have your required 2 children, so I hate you for
Now
that.
you tell me.
Well, no. But you have to give it your best shot, which means if you are fortunate enough, if you get married, you have to give it a shot. You can't say, well, we'd rather be rich, or we'd rather not spend, we don't want to. You can't do that. And Hezekiah was intentionally not having kids because he had learned that his children wouldn't be virtuous. So he said, okay, I'll just do the easy thing and not have kids. Can't have unvirtuous kids if you don't have them. But the prophet goes to him and says, Hezekiah, you're messing up. You're intentionally breaking a commandment, which is far worse than incidentally breaking a commandment. And so Hezekiah says, well, I'm a good king. I don't want to be known for breaking commandments. So, and that brings us here. So Hezekiah says to Isaiah, now give me your daughter as my wife. Perhaps my merit and your merit will cause virtuous children to emerge from me. So this is almost, what do we say on Yom Kippur? This is going to be a little bit of a leap, but not that much. Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. What can they do? They can transcend, in English we say they transcend the harshness of the decree. Maybe we say that they avert God's wrath. We say that these are things, even if God has said this is what's going to happen, if you do these things, God might say, actually, I've changed my mind because you returned and you decided to be good. So you did teshuvah, so it doesn't have to be that way anymore. So in a way, that's kind of what Hezekiah is doing here. Hezekiah is saying, maybe there's enough merit in my good deeds and in your good deeds as the prophet that if I marry your daughter, that we might be able to have righteous children. Because you are so meritorious as a prophet. I don't know if Hezekiah realizes the tough lives the prophets usually lead, but he was nice, so maybe it wasn't such a big deal for Isaiah. Okay, so but Isaiah says to him, the decree has already been decreed against you. And meaning, unlike sometimes when it can be changed, this time this is written. This is what's got to be. You're not just some shepherd who their kids can be virtuous or not virtuous, and it may not, if your kids have to be what they're going to be, essentially, because of, not that they have to be. I'm sorry, I should say that differently, because have to be makes it sound like it's predestined. It's going to be that. There's a difference. It may be hard to see, but there's a difference between predestination, saying God has decreed it be so. That steals the free will from these people. It just happens to be that even if these two meritorious people, you have to remember, from the free will perspective, their children are still going to have free will, and they're still going to be wicked regardless. There's nothing he can do that's going to change what these kids are going to be. Now, they could choose to be different, but God doesn't think they're going to. And in fact, they won't. But that's something Hezekiah can't possibly know for sure in that moment. Hezekiah said to him, we're referring to them by last names now, Ben Amos, cease your prophecy and leave. Right? As long as the prophet spoke as God's emissary, we touched on this last week, but I wanted to go over it. Hezekiah was obligated to listen to him. But of course, once he's just talking, once he's just being like, hey, your kids are going to be bad and whatever, like, like once you're just talking, I don't need to listen to you anymore, is where we ended last week, right? I don't need to listen to you because you're just a guy now. You're not speaking for God. You're just speaking as an ornery guy, and I don't have to listen to a guy, right? I'm the king still, and you're just a guy. So we're not calling you by anything else. We're saying, okay, Ben Amos, get out. Like you're just another guy. Get out of here. I don't need to listen to you.
Leave, dude.
Right. So essentially, right, exactly. What Steinsaltz says here is that this was Isaiah's personal opinion that there was no possibility for mercy in this situation. And since it's a personal opinion, he's not obligated to listen to it. So Hezekiah continued, I have received a tradition from the house of my father's father, from King David, the founding father of the dynasty of the kings of Judea. Even if a sharp sword rests upon a person's neck, he should not prevent himself from praying for mercy. And that's something he very well would inherit from David, right? Since David was in that situation, has been in situations like that. Steinsaltz says one may still hold out hope that his prayers will be answered as was David himself when he saw the angel of destruction, but nonetheless prayed for mercy and his prayers were answered. There were many times where David was in difficult straits and he prayed for God and was delivered, essentially. It worked out for him in those situations. So it makes sense that Hezekiah would say, look, my family has a history of it working out, of having a very personal relationship with God. I have my own minhag from the house of my grandfather, David, and it's not really his grandfather specifically, it's his great-great-great-grandfather, but still, it's there. And saying, David constantly was in these troubles, military troubles, spiritual troubles, and God said, this is it for you. And it wasn't it for him. So with regard to the fact that one should not despair of God's mercy, the Gemara cites that it was also said that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer both said, and I mentioned last time that Rabbi Eliezer is the guy for whom we say every time there is an opinion, it is in accordance with Rabbi Eliezer. So they both said even if a sharp sword is resting upon a person's neck, he should not prevent himself from praying for mercy. As it is stated in the words of Job, though he slay me, I will trust in him. Right. Because that's what a faithful person does, right? Because if anyone can change that situation, it's God. So even if God has ordained that you're in this position where you're about to be, that's how they used to kill people. It was an easy way to execute people back in the olden days. If you drove a sword right through here, it would easily sever your right, and you'd just die. So it was a very easy, just into the back of the neck. And that's what they're referring to, is that if you're standing here and you're literally a second, all they have to do is go like this and you die. Even if the sword is resting on the base of your neck, you can still pray to God to relieve you from that situation. You should, in fact. And a faithful person would. And a faithful person might be responded to, it seems to be the implication. Keep in mind, the idea is we understand in that moment that our life is forfeit. We don't pray saying, oh yes, this will be the moment where a miracle happens for me. It comes from a place of much more humility and understanding that though a decree has already been made, an appeal to mercy is always appropriate.
Job says, though he slay me, I will trust in him.
Right.
So he's saying, even if I die, I trust that what comes after death will be in God's hand.
Yeah, let's look at the verse from Job.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
Is faith a learned response or is it innate?
that's a very interesting question. I think overall it becomes a learned response. I think a lot for many people, and I include myself in this, the first way one analyzes something or responds to something is often not through faith. So often it's analytical, often it's scientific, based on evidence that you can perceive.
Evidence-based.
Sure. I was thinking, I keep wanting to say epistemological, but that's not the word. There's a word, but I keep forgetting it. I'm finally reaching, I keep forgetting the word, but there's a word for that evidence. Anyway, there are different ways people encounter the world. Some people probably do as a natural response. I can't say it's me because it isn't, but there are probably people whose first response is faith-based, where it's how can I perceive what's happening here in regard to what God wants for me or what God is ordaining for the world. I think if you want to see the world that way, for most of us, it has to be learned. I think you've got to train yourself to try and see the world through that lens.
You know where I'm coming from.
I mean, I'm not sure I know where you're going, but I'm trying to give you the best answer I can. If you have a follow-up question, I'm happy to respond to it.
No, God is giving direction through these rabbis.
Yeah.
Why is it necessary to give that direction through rabbis? Why isn't it just part of our soul?
Because that's not how we weren't created as beings who had to do anything as a first principle. You got to understand. So God created the angels that way, exactly what you're talking about, with a certain preset motivation and knowledge and all that. But God was not totally pleased. I don't want to say not pleased with the angels, but the angels didn't satisfy God because they could never really be their own, they could never be their own entity because God had interfered with how they developed. They had a given first principle. There's no way they could ever be anything but what they were. God decided to create something special in humanity, something not so powerful that it couldn't be controlled, but something that God was practicing what we call tzimtzum, the intentional retraction of God's self, saying, this is something I will not touch. And I don't have the power to change. I could change. I could give them $1 million or so. I don't know. That's not really how I perceive God practicing, but you could change things about that person's world, but you couldn't change that person. And because of that, the difficulty is we can't come pre-programmed with how we're supposed to be because we have to earn it. We have to figure it out. We are a science experiment, essentially, of God's, a faith science experiment of can a thing, an intelligent thing with reason and the capacity to build and grow, can that thing choose to be not to be subsumed under God, but can that thing choose to see the world right in the way God wants us to see it? Not by God saying, see it this way, and we go, yep. Although God gives us commandments, because God doesn't want us to flounder and struggle and wonder what God wants from us. We've seen the results of that. Cain and Abel is a perfect story of that. That almost happens because Cain doesn't understand why his sacrifice is rejected while his brother's is accepted. He doesn't know what he's supposed to do, but now we do. And it's still up to us to do it. And so if you want to, God wants us to be able not to only see the world through a faith-based perspective, through a belief that even at the last moment, God could give a reprieve from a sentence, but to know that God could, to believe that God could. You don't have to approach every situation as if that's what's happening or what's going to happen. But can you reach for the belief that it's possible? Can you bring yourself to that point? I can't answer for you. You're a human being. I can't manipulate you that way. Neither can God. You have to make that determination. You have to do it for yourself. With the guidance of the Talmud and the rabbis, we can learn about, in this way, even here, what we should expect from mercy, which is, it's not an expectation. It's a prayer. It's a hope. It's one of those things that the rabbis give us many of that is ephemeral. It's not tangible. It's something we have to grasp in our minds and we have to believe in. And maybe that belief can impact the world. And that would be the non-tangible effect of God in the world, sort of. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I've been speaking for a couple minutes now, so I figured I should stop. Yeah,
I wish we had those last 5 minutes on tape.
we do. They're recorded.
Oh, good. That was an.
They're gonna be on
extremely
YouTube.
Helpful lesson.
Okay, they're gonna be on YouTube. You can go back and listen to them. I'll have to do that too, because I don't know what I said.
Well, what you said was very meaningful.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
yes.
I just speak and I'm trying to connect ideas as I go.
I understand this whole process.
Sure, yeah.
Should be a give and take. That's. what-
Yeah, of course. That's what it's
that's-
gotta be.
That's what being Jewish is.
And if you hadn't asked your question, I wouldn't have been able to say whatever it was Lauren thought was so nice.
Yeah,
So, so we need the questions. The questions are important. Without the questions, we don't learn any of this. And without questions, none of these rabbis would have said any of this. All of their sayings are in response to questions.
It's a challenging religion.
It's a very challenging religion. That's why it's advanced religion. It's not easy. Sorry, I don't want to besmirch other people's religions, but there are easy religions out there that don't demand that much of you. Judaism is not one of those. I just made somebody asked me, we're doing the interfaith Thanksgiving, as a short aside, we're doing the interfaith Thanksgiving service tonight at some Methodist church. It's in the bulletin or in the announcements. I'm gonna have to look up the address myself, but I wrote a benediction already for it. So I'm giving the benediction tonight. And I was also asked by one of our people we put up tables before the event where all the religions can kind of show off what they, some of their trinkets and whatnot. And we do too. We bring a Havdalah set and the menorah and all that stuff. And I was asked to create this year a one pager about Judaism that we can put on the table that people can get. And said, I need one page, just a thing with some graphics and graphics too. Okay, so even less space for text. How much space do I have to explain Judaism to these people? In the end, I came up with 5 points. And I wrote 5 simple points to try and explain what is a really complicated religion. And I'll actually, let me grab it for you. I'll pass it around and you can see what I came up with real quick.
I don't mean to interrupt you.
No,
No, the
it's,
digression is what makes it beautiful.
yeah, and as he said,
Thank
the
you.
questions
The
help us all.
questions, yeah.
At this point, I have a lot of questions.
So do I.
So you can pass this around. This is what we're gonna give out tonight, but I only had a couple minutes to do it, so it's not that impressive, but hopefully it's adequate for their needs. But the point was that it's terribly difficult to distill. Even as I printed it, I said there are 1,000 things I should have written that I couldn't write because there's not enough room, but what can you do? Yeah, no, please go ahead and take a look at it. Yeah, again, the font very small because what can I do? It's There's still, you gotta say something. You can't say nothing.
Yeah.
What could you do for Shabbat? You say Shabbat is every 7 days. That wouldn't be enough, right? That doesn't tell you anything about it. You gotta say at least a little more. So that's what we get. Okay, good. And speaking of that, Deborah got it, which is important.
I think you made wonderful choices.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. But we'll do that and can pass that on to Lindsay and she can take a look at it. And we will, so anyway, this thing from Job, I wanted to go over just because it was mentioned that though he slay me, I will trust in him. And this is chapter 13 here. Job speaking to his friends, the friends that have not treated him so good. And he said that they abandoned him because he's not favored by God in the story of Job. It says, my eye has seen all this, my ear has heard and understood it. What you know, I know also. I am not less than you. Indeed, I would speak to the Almighty. I insist on arguing with God. But you invent lies. All of you are quacks. And literally that means like lying doctors here. It's Rofei Elil Kulchem. You are all lying doctors. So we translated that as quacks because we figured that they would get what that meant. If you would only keep quiet, it would be considered wisdom on your part. Again, he's not that happy with these people at this point. Hear now my arguments, listen to my pleading. Will you speak unjustly on God's behalf? Because what they've done, remember what they've done in this story is they go and they invent reasons for why Job must be not suffering. And that's why he calls them quacks and stuff, because they keep going, oh, maybe it's this, and maybe it's, and he's like, you're making stuff up. You're just lying about me at this point. And speaking deceitfully and showing partiality, will you plead God's cause? Does God need that? Will it go well when you are examined? Will you fool God as you would a mortal? In other words, I know you guys. Like, you guys are you guys that great? Like, surely you will be reproved if in your heart you show partiality. God's threat will terrify you and fear will seize you. Your briefs are empty platitudes. Your responses are unsubstantial. Keep quiet, I will have my say, come what may upon me. How long? I will take my flesh in my teeth. I will take my life in my hands. And this is the line, I may well be slain. I may have no hope. Yet I will argue my case before God. And in this, it was translated as, though he slay me, I will trust in him. The more modern translation is, I may well be slain. I may have no hope. Yet I will argue my case before God. In this too is my salvation, that no one impious can come into God's presence. Listen closely to my words, give ear to my discourse. See, now I have prepared a case. I know that I will win it. For who is it that would challenge me? I should then keep silent and expire. But two things do not do to me, so that I need not hide from you. Remove your hand from me, and let not your terror frighten me. Then summon me, and I will respond, or I will speak, and you reply to me. How many are my iniquities and sins? Advise me of my transgression and sin. Why do you hide your face and treat me like an enemy? Will you harass a driven leaf? Will you pursue dried up straw? That you decree from me bitter things and make me answer for the iniquities of my youth? That you put my feet in the stocks and watch all my ways, hemming in my footsteps? One wastes away like a rotten thing, like a garment eaten by moths. Anyway, it's a very interesting book, obviously. Job is a very interesting thing, but it's funny. So what is Job with the context here? We're saying, remember, Job is in this place where Job is nothing now. That's why he says to God, in the part where he's arguing his case before God, he's saying, am I like, would you pursue dried up straw? Would you pursue the driven leaf? In other words, the leaf that's already off of the tree and on the ground. Like, these withered things they're dead. They have no power. They have no vitality. They have no restorative possibility. And that's the situation he sees himself as at that point. He's lost everything. He has nothing, he thinks, except for his life and his faith. So he says, I should be able to ask for redress. I have a case. I feel God has treated me poorly. I don't accept your, oh, you must have done this, or you must have done that, or you must have displeased God, or you must. No, no, no. This is my God. I get to make my case. Anyway, it's a very interesting moment for Job, and he believes he can win it, and he believes there's a possibility for mercy, even though he's already suffered all the things he could suffer short of death. He's already it appears to his friends he's already lost the case, and he says to his friends, "My case hasn't even started yet." Okay. And that's kind of the attitude you have to have if you're seeking mercy. Is you're not seeking the time unfold itself and the things that have happened not happen, but you are seeking a redress of unfairness after the unfairness has happened to you, after it's happened. So okay, okay. Now we're gonna move to 10b. Similarly, okay, Rabbi Hanan said, even if the master of dreams, Baal HaChalomim, that would be a great title, the master of dreams. In a true dream, an angel tells a person that tomorrow he will die. He should not prevent himself from praying for mercy. As it is stated, for in the multitude of dreams and vanities there are many words, but fear God. And I really want, because it's Kohelet, I want the oh, that's dumb. It cut off the right. For much dreaming leads to futility and to superfluous talk. And it does say at the end, Ki et Elohim yirah. So it does say, but fear God. I don't know why it omits it on the right side translation. But yeah, okay. Right. So although the dream might seem real, our trust is in God, not in signs, not in visions, not in we think this might happen. God is the ultimate arbiter. So make your case to God. Don't, even if you think this is I'm assuredly going, the angel of death is coming for me tomorrow, you say, no, I still pray. Why do I pray? Because it's not set. It's not set. There's no guarantee that's what's going to happen. Yeah.
The master of dreams is who, Rabbi? Who's that?
No. They're saying because someone who's a master of dreams wouldn't have false dreams. So they're saying even if someone who was dreaming a true dream dreamed of an angel, that would tell them that they would die. So even if you had reason to believe the dream was prophetic in some way, you still pray for mercy from God because God is the ultimate arbiter. Having heard Isaiah's harsh prophecy, immediately Hezekiah turned his face remember we were talking about Isaiah and Hezekiah when we started. Hezekiah turned his face toward the wall, V'yitpalel el Adonai, and he prayed to God.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah.
Is the thing that Hezekiah is complaining about his children, or did he not have a very serious disease and was going to die of his disease?
There's also that. I mean, no, he also has the disease thing came about because he had the disease and he had not had children. But he's spared that. I don't want to. They might go into that They might go into that part of the story as part of their Talmudic story later. But in the Book of Kings, he is ill. He's restored to life, and does a bunch more really good things, and then has wicked children. I mean, he has the wicked children probably earlier, but then by the time they grow up, they're wicked. So yes, Hezekiah has his troubles, but he also has a lot of successes. And famously, today you can still walk through a drainage tunnel that he escaped that they use as an escape route in the Torah. Is you can walk through it today. I've done, to be fair, the water does go up to about the ankle, but I've walked through it. It's you climb down a ladder into the depths of Jerusalem and then you walk through this tunnel. Anyway, Hezekiah's tunnel, a water drainage system that was also an escape route, is still exists today. So we know Hezekiah was a real guy because they wrote inside it, this is Hezekiah's tunnel, or was constructed on the orders of King Hezekiah. So we believe he's real anyway. Anyway, so he goes and he prays. The Gemara asks, now, if you read this phrase, read the second verse, and it says, immediately Hezekiah turned his face toward the wall and prayed to God. What would your question, what do you think the Gemara's question is about this verse?
Why did he turn to a wall
Okay, that's a great question.
instead of, just stay facing normally?
That's a good question. Anybody else?
What is it that he's fearing and asking reprieve from?
Okay, that's a good one too. He's so, and we believe that it's about Isaiah's harsh prophecy, right? That just happened. 10 points to Lindsay. That is what the rabbis are going to be concerned about. They start, my kier. Why wall? Right? That's what it starts. The Gemara asks, what is meant by the word kier or wall in this context? Why did Hezekiah turn to face a wall? As Lindsay asked, that's a good question. What does it mean? So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, and what else is Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish known as? Reish Lakish, just in case you see those, because Reish Lakish is mentioned a lot, just in case you see that, sometimes they give his full name. Reish is just a abbreviation of Rabbi Shimon. Reish. We put a vowel under the Reish and then to the Shin, Reish Lakish, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So when it says that, it's a lot of those are like that. Rashi is also, his name wasn't Rashi. Rambam, these are all, it starts with Rabbi, Harav, and then moves on to whatever their name was, and it forms a thing. Mine is silly, so it's not necessary. Mine would be the same as Rashbam, so it's not, he already has that one. Anyway, so Reish Lakish said, this symbolically alludes to the fact that Hezekiah prayed to God from the chambers or kirot of his heart. As it is stated elsewhere, my anguish, I am in pain, the chambers of my heart. And they use kirot in that verse from Jeremiah. So he's saying here doesn't just mean wall, it also means like the way walls might be surrounding in a chamber. So a kier could also be a chamber. And if it's a chamber, it could mean the chambers of the heart. And so that he was praying with intentionality. He turned his face toward his heart and prayed. Okay. How does everybody feel with that? Are we satisfied? Okay, we're gonna talk more about this. Rabbi Levi said, Hezekiah intended to evoke matters relating to a wall. And he said before God, Ribono shel olam, and if the woman from Shunem, who made only a single small wall on the roof for the prophet Elisha, and you revived her son, remember, this is referring to when the prophet Elisha comes back from the desert with the mantle of Elijah. he visits a woman and she had just she only had a small parapet on her roof, but he healed her son and did the thing with the food. I can look it up, but you remember it. He did the thing and if you do this every day, the kid will get better, and the kid got better. So you revived her son, even though she just had a small parapet on her roof. Alakat kama v'kama, even more so, should you bring life to the descendant of my father's father, King Solomon, who covered the entire temple sanctuary with silver and gold. Right? This is Hezekiah's prayer. Hezekiah is saying, you did this great, great thing for this woman who was so poor. Maybe I think he's talking about her poverty, because he's saying she could only build like a little parapet, like a little bit of a wall on top of her roof. Remember, that's a commandment, deraisa, from the Torah, that you build a parapet on your roof so that nobody who's working up there could fall off. It's a protection measure, and you're required to do it. So she just had a very, very small one because she didn't have much. Meanwhile, Hezekiah, his great-grandfather, built the temple. It doesn't sound good to me, right? It sounds a little bit like an appeal to wealth almost, or an appeal to nepotism. I don't know. It's do you know who my great-granddaddy was?
I'm entitled.
Right, yeah. I'm entitled to your, and we saw him before, which I didn't think was a problem, but he did mention, what did he say to Isaiah? He said, my family has a tradition from my father's father, meaning David, that we can intervene with God, right? Being the king comes with a little bit of airs, right? I mean, right. He's supposed to be just like everybody else in a way, but there's a way he just can't be, because his great-granddaddy was also the king. So in his prayer, Hezekiah said, please, God, please remember that I walked before you in truth and with a complete heart, and what was good in your eyes, I did. And Hezekiah wept until he was sore, until and that's from Isaiah. That part we have in our text. So it doesn't feel great, the appeal he's making, but I think his appeal is genuine. It's not like, do it for me because my grandfather was Solomon and my great-grandfather was David. He's saying, do it for me because of their merit. Because they merited it. And I merit it too, because I pray. I walk before you in truth. I don't lie. I don't lead people astray. I do what I'm supposed to do for you with a complete heart. And to be fair, he is one of the righteous kings. He's doing what God wants him to do as king. So he's like, look, I'm playing, not all of them do, and he's playing by the rules. He's like, hey, maybe I should get some. But is this the kind of faith that he gets to pray for this mercy? That's a question I still have. What has he done to earn what he's asking for? He doesn't have to earn it. It could be just forgiveness that God gives him, but will he? Will God? I don't know.
Isn't he saying, like Job, I haven't done things wrong?
Well, in a way, he's making his case the way Job did, right? He's saying, look, I did right by you.
Yeah.
I was a truthful king. I did it with a complete heart, and I did what the prophets and the priests told me to do, that you would be happy with. So, okay, so he does claim already that he did what was good in God's eyes. So the Talmud we need some proof for that statement. The Talmud's going to say, oh, okay, you say you did good. To what specific action was Hezekiah referring to when he said, and what was good in your sight, I did? So there are many opinions that there are a couple opinions that the rabbis have about what he did that was particularly good, that would have earned him. Keep in mind, we know the end of the story. He gets what he's asking for. So in a way, yeah, anyway, the rabbis come up with it. So they have to come up with merits of his, and it's not that hard. He has them. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav that King Hezekiah juxtaposed redemption in prayer at sunrise instead of sleeping late. Remember, we read about that already, that that's a rule, that they're supposed to do that. David did, but then they all stopped doing it for a while. But then Hezekiah does. He wakes up early so that he can say the morning Shema when he's supposed to, as opposed to most kings, which sleep in because they're kings. Okay, that's Rav Yehuda's. He says, okay, he did this. He reinstituted an old practice and showed devotion to God. Rabbi Levi said he suppressed the book of remedies upon which everyone relied. We can guess what the book of remedies is. Let me see if there's a. Oh, yeah. So there was it's not like magic, I don't think, but it was a book of healing and stuff. And Hezekiah suppressed it so that people would pray to God for healing instead of turning to the book of remedies, which doesn't sound great to me, but certainly sounds pious at the very least. So anyway, the sages taught. Here's another one. So the sages come in and they say, this is it. King Hezekiah performed 6 innovative actions. Remember, what we do, even historically, we associate Hezekiah with a set of reforms, just like Josiah is later also identified with a set of reforms. So the sages are going to go over those reforms, and they're going to say, with 6 actions, and they say innovative. In other words, he made these as reforms. With regard to the three, the sages agreed with him, and with regard to 3, they did not agree with him. So in other words, he did 6 actions. 3 were good according to the rabbis. 3 were not so good according to the rabbis. With regard to the 3 actions, the sages agreed with him. He suppressed the book of remedies, and the rabbis like that. He ground the copper snake, which they kept, which they had in the temple, which was what they used in the book of Numbers. It was the staff that kept them from being ill. Remember, there was this big illness that struck them for being bad, and God, where the snakes came and struck everybody. And so Moses was told, when God was no longer angry with them, make this copper snake, and it'll drive all the snakes away. But thinking back on it, they're like, that's really kind of idolatrous because it's created like a powerful staff. We don't really want a powerful snake staff out here. It makes it seem like we might worship that snake. So let's not do that. And so he destroyed it because someone used it in idol worship, as we were worried they would. So he destroyed it, and they agreed with him. They said, okay, good move. You destroyed it, but it was starting to cause more problems than it was worth. And he dragged the bones of his evil father, King Ahaz, on a bed of ropes, meaning he did not accord his father a funeral fit for a king. And they agreed with him because Ahaz was really bad. So yet with regard to 3 other innovations, the rabbis do not agree with him. He stopped up the waters of the Gihon, the pool of Siloam, diverting its water into the city by means of a tunnel. This is Hezekiah's tunnel. This is the tunnel that you can still walk through. It's still there, and it's talked about in the book of Chronicles, and it's still there today. And they did not agree with him for creating that tunnel. I don't know why, they just don't like it.
You're supposed to rely on God.
I guess, I don't know. This was a better way, but they didn't like it. He cut off the doors of the sanctuary and sent them to the king of Assyria as tribute. Assyria was so powerful that they demanded tribute. Remember, those doors, all those things were made out of gold and silver and whatnot. The temple was very impressive. Imagine all the doors and walls and stuff, it's all made out of gold and silver. But that means if you need a bunch of silver to send as a tribute, you might just take the doors off the temple. Say, oh, everything's the same in here. We just thought it was better open air. Right? So he sent the doors to Assyria as tribute, but the rabbis don't like that he dismantled the temple, and many kings will, and it's not good when they do, but sometimes you need a bunch of silver, and taxes are hard. Anyway, and he intercalated Nisan in Nisan. He created a leap year by adding an extra month during the month of Nisan, instead of adding a second Adar. So in our calendar, when the moon doesn't, when it doesn't line up exactly, remember that's when we add a second Adar. And when we do that, Purim is in that second month of Adar and not the first one. Only when we have one Adar is it in the first month of Adar. But he didn't want to have a second Adar. So he just added days to Nisan. It sounds like he just added days to the next month, and said, that'll do. And the rabbis are like, we don't like that. We had a whole system and he changed it and we don't like that. So those are the three things he did they didn't like. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about the intercalation of Nisan. So the Gemara asks, did Hezekiah not accept the halacha? This month will be for you the first of the months. It shall be the first for you of the months of the year. By inference, this first month is Nisan, and no other month is Nisan. How could Hezekiah add an additional Nisan in violation of Torah law? The Gemara answers with that the scenario was different than the rabbis imagined. It wasn't that. Rather, Hezekiah erred with regard to the halakhic opinion ascribed in later generations to Shmuel. As Shmuel said, one may not intercalate the year on the 30th day of Adar, since it is fit to establish it as the new moon of Nisan. Hezekiah held that we do not say, since that day is fit to establish it as the new moon, is reason enough to refrain from intercalation of the year. This does not matter. Please just pass over it. Please just, the rabbis really care about the calendar, and I also really care about the calendar, but you will learn nothing that will change your life by learning about Nisan versus adding an Adar. They don't like that he didn't follow the halakha as they understand it. That's what you need to know. Okay, we're going to move back to Hezekiah's prayer, which is a little more interesting. Stemming from the analysis of Hezekiah's prayer, Rabbi Yochanan said, in the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, anyone who bases his prayer or request upon his own merit, when God answers his prayer, it is based upon the merit of others. And anyone who modestly bases his prayer or request upon the merit of others, when God answers his prayer, it is based upon his own merit. Isn't that interesting? If you pray saying, God, I am so great, your request or your prayer is granted based on the merit, maybe of your family members, maybe your ancestors or your children. But when you say, which is why, by the way, we start our main prayer talking about the avot, the imahot. We say, in the name of our blessed ancestors, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and Sarah and Rachel and Leah and Rebecca. I got that out of order, but you get it. Because they were so great and they did so many good things, bless us too. And then God judges us on our own merits. But if you pray to God saying, look how great I am and all the things I've done for you, then God doesn't base it on your own merit. Because you may well have done very meritorious things, but your mindset's wrong. You're proud, arrogant, and God doesn't like that. So then you better hope you have really righteous family members or close friends, because God's not basing the request on you alone. God's basing it on them too. Isn't that fascinating?
And if we go back to his prayer, he had said, my grandfather Solomon built the temple.
Yes, he did, that's right.
So, yeah,
So it should be based on his merit, based on
Yeah.
that, right?
yeah.
But then the second time, he said, I have been truthful, and I have done it based on my heart, and I should be given this because I'm because of my merit. Maybe he's right. But in any event, this is a fascinating approach to when God grants prayers and based on whose merit. So the Gemara is going to cite a proof. This is the last thing we're going to do, but the Gemara is going to cite a proof because that's a big claim they just made. They can't just make a claim like that. They're essentially saying this is how it works. I mean, when you say something like that, you got to have proof. So it comes from Moses. When Moses prayed to God for forgiveness after the incident of the golden calf, he did what we do. He based his request upon the merit of others, as it is stated. In Exodus 32, he says, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore upon yourself and told them, I will increase your descendants like the stars of the heavens, and all of this land of which I have spoken I will give to your descendants, and they will inherit it forever. Yet when this story is related, God's forgiveness of Israel, when in Psalms, God said, this is what it says in Psalms, that it's based upon Moses' own merit. As it is stated, and God said God would destroy them. Had Moses, God's chosen, not stood before God in the breach to turn back God's destructive fury, lest God should destroy them. So Moses' request was not based on Moses' merit. It was based on the merit of their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But when God granted the request, he did it because of the righteousness of Moses. Had Moses asked for himself, it would have had to be based, we might have been really in trouble. Because whose merit would God have based it on then?
Can I wrestle with that a little bit?
Yes, you can, and there's an easy way to. Go with it. We'll see if you do what I was going to do.
When I pray, I'm not saying to God, please hear me because of my mother and my father and my grandfather. I'm saying, dear God, I'm suffering, or I need your help. Please help me. I don't arrogantly say, I've done all these good things and I deserve your help, but I am asking him to consider my plight, my suffering, rather than naming my ancestors.
Yes. So there's the way I wrestle with this myself is that, well, what if you did it based on yourself and God decided to think about the merit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? I mean, they have the merit, right? If you'd asked in their name, it would have worked maybe. So, so theoretically, God can affect it if God wants, right? It's more about how we approach seeking requests from God, right? We say all the time, and I'm sure they'll come to it soon if they're not going to come back to it later. You can never make a presumptuous request of God. There's a different word for that I'm forgetting, translated from Hebrew. But it's almost like it's an arrogant request is the term. You can't assume you get to ask God anything. Your request to God, because you have free will and can speak, you get to make a request if you want one. But God's only going to only receive it if God chooses to. So your request may never be heard if it's terrible. If you're like, on behalf of the great merit of that snail in the parking lot, please give me $10 million. I guarantee God won't hear that. God's got no interest in that request. So it's all about being in the right mindset to even make the right request. The rabbis want you here to make the right request in the right way. They want you to have the best shot. And to do that, you have to be in a certain mindset. You have to approach it from a certain way, much like when you approach a king. These days, it's not so much, but even now, when you go, they give you protocol sheets. They tell you what you're supposed to do. You come this far, and then you bow from the neck, and then you move closer, and then you bow again from the. I only know the British one because it's in a movie and they make fun of it. But theoretically, they all had various things. We know from the story of Esther that Esther knew she wasn't supposed to approach Ahasuerus unless he lowered his staff to her, and that was the symbol that you could approach and ask something of the king. If they didn't do that and you did it, no good. So this is the same. What the rabbis are trying to say to you is it's the same thing. We all have requests, especially around children and family and healing and life and death and the most important things. We all have requests we want to make, and you have to approach the king in the right way if you want to make that request. Even to just make it, let alone how does it get fulfilled? To just make the request, you have to get in the room. And you get in the room by internalizing this, by understanding how you ask, what you ask, when you ask, and in what mindset you ask. All of these are important, and that's just to get the question in the door. And then God will deal with it on its merit. Yes.
It requires an assumption that the request can be filled.
We believe that God can effect any request. So the request can be filled. I think the rabbis would say, if you don't believe God can fulfill the request, why make it? They'd be like, don't act, I mean, it's like if you don't believe, God's not going to, believing is again part of getting yourself in the door. It's not prerequisite to being granted, though. That's the good news. It's good news because only merit seems to be, at this point, a determining factor in the request being granted. The tricky thing seems to be getting the request, getting that envelope delivered, seems to be trickier than getting the request granted. Because God is so merciful. If God saw every request, if God allowed God's self to see every request, God might grant them all because God's so good. So
there's no harm in the asking.
Right. I would actually say, I would say there might be harm in the asking, but there's no harm in the earnest asking. In someone who's done the work, there's no harm in asking. I would say you got to know how to ask, though. If you don't know how to ask, then there could be harm in asking, because you could do what Hezekiah did. And you could say, because I've been so good to you, please grant me X. And God will say, well, that's not really how it works. But the Talmud tells you how it works. And now you say, not for me, but because of my ancestors who did right by you and tried to live as you wanted, I ask you this. And we're going to learn more about the proper way to make these requests next time. So
I think the focus really